Hello, everybody. Welcome to the RPA Vanguard channel. My name is Andy Menon. In this video, we are going to be building upon the bare bones pipeline we built in an earlier video using the UiPath integration service for Outlook 365. Let's get started. Before we begin, it is required that you watch this previous video on this subject. The steps outlined in that earlier video will not be repeated during the course of this session. So what we are going to do in this video is we'll build upon the bare bones pipeline and use it to automate a subset of functions performed by a banking application. It goes without saying that this implementation presumes that audience are familiar with using online/mobile banking applications to perform normal banking functions, such as money transfers and understanding of the different kinds of accounts such as checking and savings. Now let's step into a quick recap of where we left this topic off in the last video. Here is the block diagram of the bare bones integration service pipeline that we built in the previous video, right? It starts with a trusted sender sending an email to an Outlook 365 integration service account. And this Outlook 365 integration service account is associated with an integration service connection that is set up in the UiPath automation cloud. And as we saw in the previous video, this integration service connection has got a polling timer that periodically checks into your Outlook 365 mailbox for new emails that have been received in this account. And once the integration service connection senses or detects a new email, that email is picked up and then passed on to a trigger. Now the trigger takes in all of the information of that new email and passes the trigger parameters to a demo process and then initiates that demo process, right? And in the previous video, you saw that the demo process was a very plain and bare bones process. It was an unattended automation. It was not background, but it did not have any UI automation elements in it. Further, the other thing that this demo process did not do was to respond back to the integration service connection, right? To update the status of the email event that it had processed, right? So this was a very bare bones foundational process that was used to demonstrate how the integration service for Microsoft Outlook 365 works. Before we get into the thick of the implementation, I want to bring in a day-to-day analogy that we encounter in our everyday lives. It's all too familiar to us on how we use a remote control to turn on an electrical or electronic device in our household, right? A large screen TV is an example of an electronic device, and a room heater or an air conditioner is an example of an electrical device. But it's important to observe what's happening here. When you pick up a remote and turn on your TV or air conditioner, for example, a small low-powered action performed by you on the left results in a high-powered or high-level effect on the right? Now, why am I saying that this is a low-powered action, right? That's because your remote is a low-powered device, right? Meaning it works within the vicinity of your target device. And most of these remotes don't even work if you stand in the next room, right? Now, the signal that is sent by this remote may be low powered, right? But that signal follows a certain protocol, right? And the message that is sent in it, right, has a specific format and follows a certain pattern or protocol imposed by the manufacturer of that TV or that air conditioner. Now, let us say you pick up the remote and turn on your air conditioner. Now, the message is initiated by the remote, and now we move on to the write. The signal that is transmitted by the remote reaches a receiver on your equipment, and that receiver interprets the signal because it understands the protocol over which this message has been sent. And once it has understood that message, what it does is it triggers what is known as a relay, right? And that relay turns on your air conditioner. Now, here's the awesome thing about a relay, right? The relay accepts a low powered signal on one side and then turns on your TV or air conditioner. Now, a TV or an air conditioner is connected to high power voltage, right? And especially devices like air conditioners use a high amount of current, right? And these currents are pretty harmful if you try to mess with them. But you just don't use remotes to turn devices on or off, right? You also perform higher level functions from your remotes. Right? These functions are, for example, turning up the volume on a TV, adjusting the brightness or contrast of your display, adjusting the temperature of the thermostat or the on your air conditioner, etc. Right? So, in essence, what you're doing is you take a remote control that is powered by a couple of batteries, which is a pretty low powered device, and you're using it to perform high powered or high level actions. Basically, a small signal on the left causes a big effect on the right. This is the inbound part of it, right? Left to right. Now let's talk about the outbound part, which is right to left, right? In more advanced scenarios, the receiver on the right is also capable of responding back to your remote, right? And some fancy remotes have got LCD screens that display the status of the device you're controlling. For example, in an air conditioner, you have the temperature, the humidity, the fan speed, and also the temperature that you have set the air conditioner at to control the temperature around the room, right? And all of these status messages are actually transmitted back by the receiver to your fancy remote, and they are displayed on the LCD of that remote control device. That begs the question, where am I going with this, right? Why did I make this slide here? That's a good question. So what I'll be doing is I will be using this analogy as a basis for the implementation of the integration pipeline. But then we need a use case, right? What's the use case? That's what we are going to take a look at next. And this is my use case, right? An online or a mobile banking application, right? I have a few thoughts on why I have chosen this use case for my demonstration. So first of all, mobile banking is pretty convenient, right? You can use it to do your banking from pretty much anywhere, from either your laptop or your mobile device. The other thing is mobile banking feels pretty secure over trusted Wi-Fi connections, especially your home Wi-Fi or your office Wi-Fi, right? Something that you trust more than any other Wi-Fi access point that you connect to in your daily lives. But there is always the shadow of small print that is always present, right? Basically, no agency or authority on this planet will ever claim that a public Wi-Fi is 100% safe. They may say that mobile banking is convenient, but nobody will ever tell you that mobile banking is going to be 100% safe, right? And that is why you see warnings about accessing public Wi-Fi if you are in a train station or if you are in an airport. The first thing that you do when you connect to the publicly accessible Wi-Fi is agree to the terms and conditions, right? Similarly, when you sign up and open a new bank account and sign up for mobile banking, the bank will also show you some terms and conditions that you have to accept and also understand the risk of conducting mobile banking or online banking, right? If you are banking from a public Wi-Fi location, it is possible for your cookies to be intercepted. And those cookies can then be used to sign in to your bank account. And then your phone could be lost or stolen, right? And if you bypass your two-factor authentication and you trust your phone and you set your phone as a trusted device, right? Chances are, if they get into your phone, if the hacker or anyone who has found your phone gets into your mobile device, chances are they can get into your bank account. And we have seen that almost every bank or every online site today implements two-factor authentication, but they are also risk prone, and there are several ways by which hackers can still beat two-factor authentication. And here is the block diagram for the integration pipeline for online banking, right? And we are going to be banking at the world famous UiPath UI Bank. Please note that the arrows in blue are going from left to right. They are inbound arrows, and the solid green arrows are outbound. They are going from right to left. Here is a trusted sender, right? And we discussed this in the previous video on the fact that we need a trusted sender account for us to be sending emails to the Outlook 365 integration service account. So the trusted sender sends a protocol email. It's not just an ordinary email, it's a protocol email in a certain manner, right? And that email is received by the Outlook 365 integration service account. And the integration service connection, as usual, picks up that email, right? And then it passes all the information to the trigger and activates the trigger. So what the trigger does is it passes the 4 standard parameters to a process called UI Bank transfer process, right? And here you can see that the demo process has been kicked out. We don't need it anymore. And this UI Bank transfer process is much more closer to reality, right? Much more closer to a practical online banking application. It is unattended. It is not background. It also contains elements of UI automation because the UI Bank web application is a user interface application, right? So what happens is once the UI Bank transfer process is initiated, it takes all the details of the email, it automates the UI Bank web application. And in this web application, we are going to be focusing on a simple money transfer action, right? The money transfer is from account A to account B and vice versa, right? It's a simple money transfer action, right? And we are going to be focusing on that part of the functionality. Now, because this application is UI based, it needs a client machine to execute, right? And we saw in the previous video how we assigned a user account to that modern folder where we deployed the demo process, right? So this web application is automated on this client machine, and this client machine has a couple of important details stored in its hard drive, right? Basically, the first thing is the UI Bank credentials, right? So if you don't already have a free account in the UiPath UI Bank sample application, please do create a login, and then please keep it handy because you will need to save that login information as credentials on your target machine, right? So this client machine has UI Bank credentials, and the other thing that it has got is a list of trusted sender email addresses, right? And that has to do with the trusted email sender that is sending emails to your Outlook 365 integration service account, right? So what the automation does is it cross-checks the trusted sender email against the list of trusted sender accounts. And if that sender is on this list, then that email is processed. Otherwise, your process will end in an error. Now let's imagine that the email has been received from a trusted sender, right? The automation will process that email, perform the money transfer, and now it is time for the process to actually communicate the status back to your trusted sender, right? And that path is indicated by these bold green arrows here. So what the automation does is it takes the failure or success status of the transfer. Remember, your money transfer can end in success or failure. And there are several cases, both technical and business, for that to happen, right? Regardless of that status, what happens is the transfer process automation collects all that information. And what it does is it responds back to the trusted sender over the same integration service connection back through your integration service account inbox and back to your trusted sender. So you see that unlike the bare bones process, we have the inbound flow of information, and we also have the outbound flow of information from right to left. So this is the process that I will be demonstrating during the course of this video. So that brings us to the protocol email, right? We spoke about protocols, messages, and protocol email. So what is the protocol email? The protocol email, like I said about the remote control signal, is a very precise, very small, and very specific set of instructions that are sent out from the trusted sender. For example, here is the protocol that I have decided upon. You can decide your own, but if I want to transfer money from checking to savings, I put in a message, CHK, single space, savings, single space, and the amount. Now, if I want to transfer the money the other way, from savings back to checking, I send a different message. I say savings, space, checking, and the amount. That's pretty much it. Now, if you notice something about this message, first off, it's very abstract. Only you and the application, the UI automation that is performing the money transfer understand this. So there's a specific protocol, right? There is no confidential info in this message. You are not putting in your name, you're not putting in your address, you're not putting in anything that identifies you, other than the fact that if you have used an email address that is that identifies you by name, right? But if you have an email address that looks like a service account as your trusted sender, that even that is now completely abstract and doesn't identify you by name, right? And then there is no banking account information. You are not sending any banking related information in your message. And very important, there is no login credentials involved. You are not sending any information about how to log into your bank. And this message shows no obvious intent. If someone looks at this message first time, they're not going to be able to figure out what it is unless you put something in the subject line, right? But at least at first glance, this message has no obvious intent. It's just a bunch of garbage, right? And then it is a very simple one-line ubiquitous email. So this is what I mean when I say protocol email, a specific set of instructions, very brief, very precise, and will not include any kind of confidential information or personally identifiable information when you send this message from your trusted account to your integration service account. Now, if you look at these two sections of the protocol message, I have actually scratched them out, right? We'll be covering this later in the video. And I have put in this deliberately here so that you take notice of this fact. Now, let's take the analogy that I spoke to you about a few slides ago, and then let us overlay that on our integration service pipeline for the mobile banking application, right? For the online banking application. Your trusted sender is sending a protocol email, which is a low powered signal. Basically, it's a simple message, right? So this is equivalent to a remote control sending a low powered signal. Your Outlook 365 integration service account and your integration service connection is equivalent to a receiver and a transmitter. Now, it's a receiver because it receives the protocol email from the sender. It is a transmitter because it sends the status message of that transfer back to your trusted sender, right? So it acts as both a receiver and a transmitter. Your integration service trigger is like a relay trigger, right? It accepts the low-powered email on one side, and then it kicks off a high-level process on the right? And your high-level process or your high-level effect is the execution of your UI bank transfer process, right? That does the money transfer. And this obviously runs on an unattended machine, which is a high power device, which is a server or a laptop that is connected to the mains. So you can see why I spent some time in talking to you about the remote control analogy and the communication from left to right and the response from right to left, right? So this is the analogy that we have applied for the purposes of building this integration pipeline for the online banking application. All right, everybody, now it's time for us to step into UiPath Studio and walk through the UI Bank transfer process. And we will start our walkthrough from this point where the integration service trigger has received the email information and then passed on the 4 standard parameter values and triggered the automation. I'm back in studio, and this is the project for the UI Bank money transfer automation. Please do note that this is not a coding session. This is a walkthrough of one of the many approaches to solving a business problem. And you are looking at the main flow of this automation, the entry point. And as usual is the case, this entry point has got those 4 standard parameters that will be passed in by the trigger. The main flow is broadly broken up into 3 flows. The first flow is the email process flow. The second is the business process flow. And the third is the response process flow. Basically, the project here has been split into multiple folders. The email process flow will use all sequences that are under the message process folder. Similarly, the business process flow will use all smaller sequences that are under the process folder. And then the third flow is under a folder called response process. The other folder is the common folder, and this folder uses the get app credentials sequence from the RE framework. And if you are already familiar with the RE framework, you know what this does. If there is a credential stored in your orchestrator, or if there is a credential stored in the credentials manager on the host machine, the client machine, then this flow or this sequence is capable of retrieving that, provided it knows the name of the credential. And then there is the config folder. This config folder consists of a single file, and I call it trusted sender list, and it's a text file, a very simple text file. And if I open up that file, this is how it's going to look. In my case, there is only one trusted sender. And what I would do in the actual file is put that email here, right? Remove this placeholder and put that email in here. You can have multiple emails chained up by separating them by commas or semicolons, but the lesser the trusted senders, the better it is. So in my case, there's only one. And so what you would be doing is you would be removing this placeholder, saving or putting in your trusted sender, and then saving this file in your project. Now let's start with the first flow, the email process flow. Now what I'll be doing is I will be skipping things that are pretty obvious, and I'll be going into detail only where it is required. What I have done is I have documented each of these flows, and I'll be talking through it. And then you can use this video as the companion, and then take this code that I'm going to share with you and go through it in detail to see how the process works. So the first flow is the email process flow. What this flow does is it has everything to do with the process of fetching the new email that has been received in your integration service account, right? And this is the sequence for email process. And as you can see, it uses all the other smaller flows from the message process subfolder, right? And the first thing that it does is it loads the list of trusted senders. Remember, when we walked through the block diagram, the process has to know who are the trusted senders so that it can evaluate the email that is coming in against the list of trusted senders. The next thing that it does is now it starts collecting the information on the new message. It has to go into the integration services account over the integration service connection, and then it has to pull the what you might call the new email message and read the message body, right? Now, the parse email instructions flow, of course, needs the event object ID. Remember, the unique ID of the incoming email is sent by the trigger in the arguments tab, right? So if we open up the arguments, the input that is provided is the UiPath event object ID. And what this flow does is it returns the email instructions. Remember, the email instruction is a simple protocol email, right? And what it also does is it will need the list of trusted senders that has been retrieved from the previous flow, right? So it takes in two arguments. One is the message ID, the other is the list of trusted senders. And if everything goes well, it outputs the instructions, right? And if I open this flow, you will see that this flow was covered in detail in the previous video. And almost all of the steps are the same, except where we are actually retrieving the email instructions. As seen from the previous video, I'm using the same integration service connection to Outlook 365, and we are retrieving the email as a new message. And I'm going to skip all the detail that we discussed in the previous video. At the end of this log message here, this step here, it must have the body of the email message. And then what it does different this time is it marks the email as read. Now, how does it know how to do that? Because it has the reference to that exact email object, right? And then it uses this activity to mark that email as read. The next thing it does is it checks to see if the email is sent from a trusted sender, right? So what it does is it pulls out the from address from the new message, the incoming message, and runs it through the list of trusted senders. Now, if that email does not exist on that list, it will throw an exception and your automation will stop. The next thing that it does is a basic validation of the message body, right? All it does is to check whether the body is empty or populated with some data. Now, if that is the case, if the body is empty, then it again stops with an invalid message error. Now, if all of that is good, it will do a fundamental validation of the protocol, right? So now I'm going to switch to Notepad to talk about this. So we have validated the message to check whether it is empty or not. If not, what it does is it tries to split the body into an array. And remember, the separator is a blank space. So here is the example of the protocol email, right? I want to transfer money from checkings to savings, and the amount is $30, right? And this is the extracted message body. Now, once the sequence splits this into an array, it should rightfully contain 3 sections, right? The pattern is either checking to savings and amount or savings to checkings and amount. Now, if the length of the array is not 3, right, then the flow ends with incorrect instructions, right? So this is a partial protocol error. Basically, it needs to have a precise set of instructions and it doesn't have it. So what happens is the flow ends with the partial protocol error, right? If not, the instructions are returned as an array. So what we get out of this parse email instructions flow is an array containing 3 segments. That is pretty much what happens here in this flow. The next thing would be to validate the email instructions, right? We did a partial validation of the protocol, but now we have to go into each of the segments to see whether that protocol is correct, right? And complete in all respects. By this time, from the previous step, the output is already in possession, right? We have a 3-segment array that's been output. Now, the fundamental instructions must follow certain rules. The rule is the money should flow from checking to savings or from savings to checking, followed by the amount, right? Therefore, if you write this in simple code, you take this array and you say if array of 0 is checking and array of 1 is saving, or array of 0 is saving and array of 1 is checking, right? It should be either of the 2 possibilities. And the third segment must be an amount, right? So we convert this into a decimal and check if it is a positive number. Obviously, you can see where this is going. You cannot transfer money from checking to checking, makes no sense, or savings to saving. And you cannot transfer money that is negative or 0, right? So this amount, the third segment, must be a valid positive number, right? And both these conditions must be true, right? One of these and the third condition. Now, if there is an error, if this message is anything but what this validation looks for, then we have a protocol error. That means you have not sent instructions correctly, right? If yes, that is good because now the automation can spend the resources to open up the UiPath UI Bank web application, right? And at this point, this will be the end of the message process, right? The email process where you have done all the work to extract the email and do some fundamental protocol validation. And this will segue into the start of the business process. And now we are back to main. The email process is complete. And here I have logged what is called as a waypoint. What that means is if the execution has reached this point, it means that your email instructions have followed the protocol, right? And now it's time to move on to the business process. And this is the business process flow. And the first thing that the business process flow will do is open up the UI Bank web page. And if it is successful, it will use the credentials that have been stored in the orchestrator, or your current host machine on which the automation is running and log in to the website, right? So once it successfully logs in, then the machine will get to this page here. So going back to the write-up, we have already opened up the web page, and using the stored credentials, we have logged in. Now, the next thing it is going to do is it is going to fetch the balances. This is where we are. So why do we need those balances? First of all, you will need them to validate your transfer instructions, right? We'll get to those validations later downstream. The second reason why you need those balances are your account drop downs are dynamic, right? And they vary with your account balances. Going back to the website, if I try to transfer some money, I go to transfer money. You see that the drop downs here change with the value of the current balances, right? And these are dynamic. So the robot, first of all, needs to retrieve your balances so that it can figure out how to select the savings or checking accounts from these two drop downs, right? So savings and then checking. So these values will be different each time. So that is the other reason why you need these balances. And the third reason is a little more out of the way and for the future. In case you want to enhance this application, if you want to invent another protocol whereby you send an email, a protocol email to your integration services account, and within a minute or two, you get your current checking and savings balances as email response. Now, in case you want to do that, then you will need these two values, right? The present account balances, right? So these are the three major reasons why the sequence has to go in and fetch those account balances, right? Now, once it has successfully done that, it has everything it needs to do the validations of the transfer instructions. Now, what are the transfer instructions, right? Earlier, when we received the email, right, those instructions were validated based on the protocol, right? The email had to be a simple text email. It had to have 3 segments, and the third segment had to be an amount, etc., etc. So we had to do that basic protocol validation. Now, once that email has cleared the protocol validation, it moves into the domain of business logic, right? And therefore, the same instructions that were sent through the email are now known as transfer instructions, right? Now, just because you have sent the email instructions correctly does not mean the transfer will happen, right? You will need to validate those instructions as well before you make the actual money transfer, right? So the next step in the process is validate transfer instructions, right? If I go back to the write-up, so these are the simple rules that the validate transfer instructions looks at. First of all, you cannot transfer money from checking to savings, right? If you do not have money in your account, right? That is the fundamental banking rule. The second thing is you cannot transfer money that exceeds your current account balance, right? And following the same rule, once you do the money transfer, your checking or savings account, whichever account you are transferring the money from, right, must not go into zero or negative balance, right? Those are the simple rules I validate the transfer with, right? So here is the first rule. It checks to see if your source account is checking. If that is the case, then the amount to be transferred must not exceed the current checking balance, right? Or send your checking account to zero or negative balance after the transfer. So it validates that condition even before it makes the transfer. Likewise, it will do the same thing for the savings account if you are transferring money from savings to checking, right? If that validation fails, this is something it's going to do different. It is not going to fail the flow, right? This is not a condition where you fail the flow. This is a condition where you gracefully trap the exception and then send a response back to the email sender, the trusted email sender, saying that your transfer has failed, right? So here, it is not going to simply throw an exception and stop. It is going to trap that exception, and it is going to write out a message saying, hey, whatever money you're trying to transfer did not succeed because of certain rules, right? So it is going to catch that error and return that as a transfer failed message. Now, if the validation is successful, right, this is where the core of the functionality happens. Now it has everything it needs and no more excuses to not make the money transfer, right? This is where it makes the money transfer in the intended direction. So if you have asked it to transfer money from checking to savings, it will do so. And if you have asked it to move money the other way, it will do so, right? Now, once the transfer is successful, right, it will capture the transfer success message from the UI Bank webpage, right? So I'm going to imitate that process here. And once the transfer is successful, it traps this message, or it extracts this message rather, and then returns it as a transfer successful message. Remember, you can have technical problems even when making the transfer in the bank account, right? Everything might be okay. It is beginning to make the transfer, but then it fails because the server went down or the internet connection failed. So for whatever reason, it can still fail, right? So if the transfer is successful, then this message is sent back. If not, an exception is sent back, right? So once it has sent either a success or failed message, it will log out of UI Bank and it will close the browser, right? And now the process will step into the response back to the sender, right? Based on the block diagram we saw, the response now starts from right, going back left to the trusted sender, right? And this is where we will be going into the final step of the main process, right? I'm going to go back to main, and we have completed our business process. Again, I'm going to have a waypoint comment here, which says that if the execution has reached here, the transfer has either succeeded or failed, right? And now it's time to get back to the sender. And this is where we step into respond to sender process, right? If you look at this flow, it will look pretty much similar to the process that you started with, where you actually pull the new message from the integration service account, right? But this time you're going to pull the same message, but it has already been read. Now, why do you need to pull the same message, the exact same message? That is because you need to respond back to that message, right? It's a unit of transaction. You get a certain message with a unique ID. You perform the business process, and now the process has to respond back to that exact email, right? And where do you get the ID of that message? It is already known in the main flow. That message ID is already available as the argument, right? UiPath event object ID. And that is the same ID that you're going to be passing in to this flow here. And what this flow does is go into the integration service connection and retrieve the email by that ID. But this time, that email has been referenced as a read message, right? This is not an old message, a new message anymore. It's the old message. And what it does is it composes a response. And that response will have a very simple communication. So what it does is it takes the original message, the email instructions, right? And then appends the status message of the transfer, right? And it tells the sender, you sent these instructions and the instruction has either succeeded or failed based on this particular status message. And the status message is either success or failure. That's all it is, right? There is no rocket science. This is pretty simple. And once it has composed the response body, it will respond to that message using the reply to email activity, right? And here you can see that the from address or the to address is the from address of the sender, which is got from read message dot from address. And then it composes the subject, right? So whatever subject line that the trusted sender has put, we use that to respond. And then we add the response body, and the response is sent back over the very same integration service connection to that exact message, right? So at this point, one unit of transaction has completed between the trusted sender and your online banking automation. So once this process is complete, you should expect a response in your inbox of the trusted email sender within a few minutes. And the time of response is based upon several factors. One of the main factors is the polling time that you have set in your integration service connection, right? If you have set 1 minute, then you will get a much faster response. But if you have set it at 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then you will get a response much later, right? And this is how the UI Bank money transfer process works. And you can see how simple this is, right? You took a simple protocol email and it resulted in a money transfer on the other end, but you did not send any personal identifiable information. You did not send any confidential information. And most importantly, all the details that are required for the automation to do online banking is confined to a small space, a small protected space, a trusted space, right? Imagine you're sitting at the airport and you want to make a money transfer. All you have to do is send a simple message, right? And if your server is active and your automation is active, and you have an active connection between your orchestrator and your client machine, the money transfer will be performed someplace else without you having to deal with the pain of transmitting confidential information, and even without having to log into your bank account, right? So you can see how that remote control analogy applies here. Simple action, low powered action on one side transforms or relays into a high powered action on the other side. Earlier in this video, when I discussed the protocol email, I had drawn your attention to these 2 points here, right? I have scratched them out. The reason for that is this application has a few issues, right? And I had to come up with a compromise solution to this problem. And I want to talk through that a little bit. But there is no one right solution to this. It all depends on how you want to run this pipeline. But one of the main things that I wanted this pipeline to do is to run unattended. And not just unattended, I wanted it to run behind locked screens, right? Now, you might ask me why. If there is a user interface based automation, if there is an automation that has to run behind locked screens, it is a banking application, right? If you are a teller at a bank and your robot is doing money transfers from one account to another, unless that bank teller is in full attendance in front of that machine, running an application like that in an open screen, again, exposes the bank, exposes that employee to be in violation of many rules, right? And one of the biggest violations would be someone can capture the screen either through a mobile device or simply steal that information by looking at the screen and capturing customers' account numbers and personal information, right? That is something that I did not want to compromise, right? I wanted this to run behind a locked screen. But this is where I ran into trouble, and I will show you the exact location where I had trouble and why I had to come up with a compromise solution. The first thing you will notice is that the areas that have been scratched out are decimal portions of the amount to be transferred, right? So please keep this in mind. So initially, when I set up this application, I set it up for background processing. I design all the applications that way. I either set all the controls to simulate type, simulate click, or send window messages. Very rarely do I code for front end processing or foreground processing. I assume that everything must run behind lock screens, right? That is something I practice. Doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. But everything in this application works great. The robot is able to log in behind lock screens without any trouble. If you look at the amount field, you will see that it works. It looks like it is geared towards working with whole number amounts. I don't understand what the reason is, but this amount field has got up and down arrows. And if I click the arrow in the upward direction, you see it actually increments in whole numbers. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not seen any banking application with an amount field that has got only whole numbers. And I have not seen an amount field that have got these arrows, right? Because realistically, you should be able to do this, right? You should be able to transfer either a whole number amount or a decimal amount between accounts. But that is where I'm having a problem. I feel that the nature of this box is causing the simulate type and send window messages to not work correctly. Now, here's the problem with that amount field. I'm using the type into activity with simulate type, which means I want it to run in the background. Now, it works with both visible and lock screens. No problem with that. But it works only with whole numbers. The moment I type in a value that contains a decimal, what it really does something bizarre. It just types in 45, right? It types everything after the decimal point. Similarly, if I put in 10.99, it will type in only 99. So this is a more serious problem because now it alters the money that you want to transfer, right? So obviously, I cannot use simulate type, even if it works on the foreground and also works in the background. Now, either there is a problem with the recent update or there is a problem with that amount field because that amount field is really funky. So the next test that I tried was send window messages. It is obviously slower, but it still works in the background. And it works flawlessly with both whole numbers and decimals. Here we have the opposite problem. It works beautifully with both sets of numbers, but when I lock the screen, it fails. The robot is unable to find the amount field each time I lock the screen. But this is something that I do not want to compromise on, right? I want it to work behind a lock screen. So what is my compromise? I want to keep simulate type because it still works well with both foreground processing and background processing when the screen is locked. But I want to transfer only whole numbers, right? No decimals. And please do test this out. And if you find a solution to this problem, right, please do post it in the forums. You may not agree with this because you might come back and say, Andy, this is not correct because the money transfer can happen in decimals and any banking application should allow that. You are correct. But the current application is transferring money from your own checking account to your own savings account. That means you are the lord and master of transferring money between the two accounts. So you can always stick to a rule saying, hey, whenever I transfer money from my checking to my savings or vice versa, I'm going to transfer a whole number, right? If you do that, the application works flawlessly. But if you were building an application to pay bills, right? If you wanted to pay your phone company, or if you wanted to send a payment to your utility company through your bank account, then that might not be a good compromise. So you have to focus on the functionality of the application before making a compromise. So I wanted you to be wary about this and not get stuck with failures. And I wanted to be very clear on what are the current issues that exist in this application and what you can do to make it work smoothly. First things first, I'm here in the integration services in the automation cloud. And under triggers, you can see that I have disabled the trigger that actually activates the demo process that was built in the previous video. And I have activated or created a new trigger that will activate the UI bank money transfer process. Further, the money transfer process has been deployed to the modern folder, and it is visible here in the assistant that is connected to this instance of the automation cloud. The next thing that I have to take note of before running this test is the current balances in the account. So I have made a note of the account balances. So for this test, I will be transferring $50 from the savings account to the checking account. And here is the protocol instruction for making that transfer. This is the single line that will be sent from my mobile device to the Outlook 365 integration service account, right? So the instruction is transfer money from savings to checking and the amount of $50. And now I have my message ready to go on the mobile device. About a minute or so after the message has been sent, you must see the automation execute on this machine. The message has been sent and the message has been received. The integration service trigger has kicked off the process, and you can see that it has been kicked into action. So I'm going to minimize everything that's on the screen here. The robot has kicked off. I'm going to keep my phone nearby and I will get a response. And there it is. There is a buzz on my phone. I have a message saying that this transfer has succeeded. So I'm going to switch to my trusted email sender account and show you the response that's been received. Here I am in the inbox of the trusted sender. And as you can see, this email is brand new. And I have received a response on the email I sent. The subject line of the email was UI Bank Make Transfer. And looking at this email in detail, you can see that the transaction took about 3 minutes. And here below is my original email that I had sent. This is the original instruction. It's a simple one-line protocol email. And here is the response sent back to me by the integration service account for Microsoft Outlook 365. And it states that the instructions below received and processed with this status message. And it says your transfer was successful. This is the same message that was picked up from the UI Bank website on a successful money transfer. And here is the instruction that was originally sent. That way, the sender of the message can confirm that the instruction, the correct instruction was processed, and there is a solid connection between the original instruction transmitted and the response received. So you can see again how small the footprint is of the entire money transfer process that was triggered by a single line. A simple, small, low-powered action on your end has caused a significant effect on the other side, right? And I'm back again to the UI bank. I have logged in, and here is the current state of my accounts after the transfer test. And here are the new balances. So comparing the before and after, $50 have been removed from savings, and the math seems to be correct. And $50 have been consequently added to the checking account, and this math also adds up. Please do remember that we are currently transferring only whole numbers. And if you lock the screen and perform another test, you will see that as long as you are transferring whole number amounts, the automation works correctly, right? And therefore, I hope that you will build a version of your own, and you will enhance it and make some more improvements, and you will build a few more protocols to do much more than a simple money transfer. But I think you get the idea. And I hope that I have been successful in demonstrating an end-to-end integration service pipeline with more practical applications such as online banking. That is all for this video. I hope you have learned something new. And if you did, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll truly appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.